Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Thursday, April 1st. No fooling. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Minnesota game is in 164 days. The game against Michigan in 240 days. Earlier this week at Buckeye Scoop, Bill Greene updated one of my favorite features. It's his annual list of recruiting rules. This is something we did a show about sometime last year that got a really, really good response. So I had decided, let's have Bill come back on to update that list. So Bill, thank you for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure, Tom. Glad to be here.
So when we say this is a list, this is a list of recruiting rules. This is not like when guys are allowed to visit campus, when coaches can scout people in person. This is about understanding what's really going on and what to really believe and not to believe in recruiting. So how did you get started writing this?
That's a great question. I don't know. I would kind of put some things down every once in a while. I was working for Scout back then, and people were like, can you get all these combined in one place instead of having them all over the message boards and they come out every couple of weeks or every couple of months? And I thought, that's a good idea. And I was kind of scared to do it. And again, I want to emphasize this, these are not rules per se. It's how I see things from my personal experiences. You could talk to Bill Kurlick or Mike Farrell or Mark Givler. They might have a totally different perspective on recruiting than I do. This is just what I've come up with in, over 25 years in the business. This is how I see things. Because people will ask me questions like, last year you kept hinting and saying that you thought Jordan Hancock would flip to Ohio State. Like, how did you know that? Well, without going into intimate details, I think that answer is explained there. Same thing when I was writing, Tamisi Adelaide was probably going to decommit from Ohio State. And I wrote that within 24 hours of him committing. People are like, how did you know that? How? Well, I can't give you specifics, but it's the answer is probably within those list of rules there, So it's just a summary of really my experiences from 25 years in the business.
Well, you have a total of 31 items on that list, and we don't have time to go through all of them, but I just want to go through at least a few of them, and then I'll link the full post from our Ask the Insiders board in the podcast post at buckeyescoop.com, so you guys can read all of it for yourself. The first one I'm going to talk about, there's this like whole series of games that goes on with recruits to help build the drama around their commitment. But you say what's interesting is it's often the first information you get on a kid that is the most accurate, like potentially months or years before anyone's close to a real decision. So why is that?
Well, I like to try to identify guys, and everyone does in this business. We kind of look at guys when they're freshmen and sophomores and kind of think, this is going to be a national recruit someday. So once I start to dig into that kid and get to know that kid, there's things I want to know before he does become a national recruit and before he gets Michigan and Ohio State and Notre Dame chasing him. And then the game is on them. And I love the game. And I like playing the game and trying to figure out the game. But there's information you can get from a kid when he's still naive to the recruiting business. And, I like to know who's the decision maker, who's going to influence this kid. These kids are no different than we were, Tom, when we were 17, 18, 19 years old. Somebody's guiding us through buying that first car or your first home. There's no difference here. So I like to know who's the person here. So that's one thing I like to know. Distance from home is another thing. And kids can reveal that information to you without even knowing that they've revealed it. But once, they become blown up and they're superstars, man, they know how to answer every question and they know how to evade every question and they're awesome at it. So you got to get all this stuff down before they blow up.
Well, you mentioned the distance from home, so let's do that one next. The recruiting world is changing, obviously getting bigger in some cases, and Ohio State is pulling kids from literally every corner of the country in most of these classes. I mean, literally Southern California and Washington and Florida and then the Northeast. I mean, they're getting kids from everywhere. So, but for the most part, you think a lot of recruiting happens a lot closer to home, and that's something people have to keep in mind when they're sort of weighing where kids might end up.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot easier for Ohio State to recruit Emil Wagner than it is an offensive lineman from California. Not to say they can't do it. They've done it. And we've seen them do it. But they're going to have a better relationship with that kid, his coach, his family, his circle, when he's right down the road than when he's 15 states away. And you've also got, sort of the most people in Ohio grew up playing football, wanting to play for Ohio State. In the neighboring states, West Virginia, Indiana, Kentucky. Yeah, they like their home state school, but they're not fighting for national championships every year. So there's a regional draw there to Ohio State. So, Ohio State with Michigan and Notre Dame is the program in the Midwest. So, like I say, the closer we are to home, the more that kid has got an influence in his life of how he perceives Ohio State. And that is probably going to be different than the kid in Miami or the kid in Dallas or the kid in LA. Not to say you can't recruit those kids and get them to Ohio State, because they do it every year. But there is an advantage built in to people that know more about Ohio State, may have even been to Ohio State for a game or sat on their dad's lap at 4 years old and were taught to worship the Buckeyes. So that's where distance can come into play.
But you mentioned offensive lineman as your example there, so we'll do that one next. We'll, there are certain positions which are notoriously very difficult to project, and offensive line is like one unit that is very, very tough. And if you can do it really well, like ta-da, you've built the Wisconsin program, and you can build quite a winning tradition on just consistently pumping out good offensive linemen. But I mean, that is not that easy to do. So how important is depth there, and how many guys does a program typically want to have in that offensive line room at a given time?
Yeah, I've talked to so many college coaches about this over the years, and it's such a unique position that you need numbers, because the hit rate is not going to be real high. Like your quarterbacks, you better hit on a high amount of them or you're going to be in trouble. But offensive linemen, man, if you're hitting 50% of them, you're probably doing okay. And the number that most of them kind of talk about is 14, 15. You got to have enough that you can account for injuries, you can account for guys not making it, but you don't want to have too many, because then you're tying up an 85-man roster with kids that really can't do anything else. They're not all that valuable running down punts or chasing kickoffs. Tough to put them in another position. So I've found over the years that 14, 15 is just about perfect, and gives you enough bodies, but you're not tied up with a bunch of big guys who can't do anything else.
Well, another position that is notoriously very difficult to scout is quarterback. You mentioned it there. And, I think we're now with the NFL draft process seeing that even NFL teams who, spend millions and millions in dollars and are theoretically the best in the world at this, it's like a coin flip whether any of these guys are going to be any good or not at the next level. And you have even more challenges from the high school to the college level, because they've got disparities in competition and all that kind of stuff, and very, very different systems in a lot of cases in high school. So, what are the things that a guy has to have to be a good quarterback recruit in your mind? What are you looking for when you're evaluating a quarterback?
Yeah, the things I've been told over the years from coaches, and the things that I've noticed myself, is you really have to be able to process things almost at warp speed. You have to know what you're seeing, and your brain has to be able to tell you what you're seeing quickly. And if you're a count late, or if you're a person that hesitates and isn't sure what you're seeing, it's over. You've missed it. You've got to be able to, your brain has to take a picture of what's happening, has to be able to transmit that instantly, and then you've got to make your decision, and that ball's got to come out. You hold the ball too long, and the play is over. You're going to get sacked. The guy's going to get covered. The window's going to close. That's the most important thing to me, is being able to process things really quickly, and then being able to act on what you're seeing. And we've seen kids over the years that, and even at other positions, where they could process things, but they hesitated to count, and that's what, if you look back in the NBA, a guy like Larry Bird was probably one of the slowest players in the league, but his brain was so far ahead of everybody else that, it didn't matter that he was slow, because he was moving to where he needed to be before the quick guy realized he had to be there. And then you look at someone like LeBron James, who also can see the game as well as anyone, but he's got the physical gifts that are better than anyone else. And then you end up with, the first or second greatest player in the history of the game. So with the QBs, I mean, and there's so many other things that come into play, with accuracy and, being able to move in the pocket. But if you cannot process things quickly, the game moves too fast and the plays by you. And that's where picks come, and sacks and fumbles and all that fun stuff.
Well, I wanted to end with my favorite one. There's 31 on the list. This was the one that I thought was like, yep, that's a big one. And I think people don't really completely understand how big it is. And you mentioned it a little bit earlier, the who the real decision maker is in the process, because that is one of those things. You can look at a recruiting profile, you can look at the huddle film. It's like, oh, I have a good sense for this kid is, and you can listen to in as many interviews as you want to, read as many profiles as you want to. Unless you know who that decision maker is, you don't necessarily have the whole picture. So, like, who are the decision makers in this kid's life? Is it just it's always mom or dad? Is it somewhere else? And how much can that that one voice swing a recruitment?
Well, like you say, it's no different than when we were 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. There, a voice that is someone you trust can swing things for you. And, in Woody Hayes' day, Woody went after the mom, and that pretty much sealed things. Well, it's not 1958 anymore. Families are different now. Kids' lives are different now. So it could be an uncle, and Urban used to, put that uncle in parentheses, and that was very accurate of him to do that. It can be grandma today. We've transitioned from, the single parent home. Now we deal with a lot of zero parent homes. So grandma can come into play, aunt can come into play. The high school coaches have really gone down in their influence, but there's still some that do have big influence. And then there's, we've gone to the AAU 7-on-7. That's kind of where we are today. And those people have a ton of influence, especially in basketball, but they do in football too. So you got to know, and I'm a story I'll tell you here, but before we leave is there was a kid Ohio State had a commitment from, and we're probably 7-8 years ago, Carlton Davis, a defensive back from Florida, committed to Ohio State for the longest time. I covered the Under Armour All-American game in Orlando, which was in early January, and then went down to Miami to cover the 7-on-7 stuff. That was the week after. So Carlton Davis is going to sign in like 3 weeks. So I do a video interview with him. I was with scout.com then, and he just gushed about Ohio State. Can't wait to get there. Love the coaches. Looking forward to striking out on his own, seeing new things. And so we clicked the recorder off, and I wish him luck. He walks away, and I'm, fiddling with my camera. And a couple of the 7-on-7 coaches in Miami said, that was a great interview, wasn't it? I said, man, it really was. And they said, well, you don't think he's going to Ohio State, do you? And I'm like, well, of course he is. And they're like, no, it'll be Auburn or Miami. Ohio State's out. And I'm like, what? And they said, you'll see. They're out. They said, Auburn or Miami. They said, probably Auburn, where he went, and it was like, wow, I need to up my game. Like I missed this completely. And they said it so matter-of-factly and so confidently, like everybody in the world should have known that. Well, I didn't know that, and then, boy, that forced me to kind of go to a different level in recruiting. And this is before there was a crystal ball or anything like that, but you still like to know what's going on and take a lot of pride in trying to figure it out. And that was one that I will never forget. That had a huge impact on me. And like I say, now I don't follow anymore for the Dream School and all that stuff anymore. So I learned. And Carlton Davis was a good one to follow, and I'll never forget it.
Well, if you would like to be smarter than Bill was in 2013, you can read his full list of 31 recruiting rules to know. Again, I will have that linked in the post on the front page of BuckeyeScoop.com when this podcast drops on Thursday morning. So you can make sure you check that out. That is on our Ask the Insiders boards. You need to be a member of Buckeye Scoop to read it. And I mean, come on, like this alone sounds like, hey, you will understand now. Like this is the Rosetta Stone for understanding recruiting and like what's actually going on with all these crazy recruitments that you're following. That seems like that'd be worth your Buckeye Scoop membership right there. But you don't just get that. You get all of our other great insiders. Mark Givler, Alex Gleitman, Tony Gerdeman, Mick Walker, Ross Fulton. There's a bunch of us. Like goodness, there's a lot of us. So you can find us all at BuckeyeScoop.com. That As the Insiders board is humming every week. Lots of exciting stuff. Kirk Barton, can't forget Kirk Barton. I told you there's a lot of us. And
Buck. You can't forget Nevada.
And Nevada Buck, of course, our ultimate insider, Nevada Buck. Yeah. And he has had a ton of fantastic practice reports, like really, really good stuff from inside Ohio State practice at a time when no one is getting inside Ohio State practice. So if you want to understand recruiting, if you want to understand Ohio State football, what's going on right now, there's only one place to do it, and that is BuckeyeScoop.com. Also, make sure you check out all of our great podcasts. on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. You can subscribe right there. Also, leave us a 5-star rating and review, which will help other folks find those shows. Finally, our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. You can subscribe right there and get notified every time I post a new video. So we've had interviews with all the Ohio State tight ends on Wednesday. Those are all up there. We're going to be talking to another round of players a little bit later on today. We'll have those there as well as all of our great podcasts, camp video, interviews, you name it. It's all there at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop, all free. All you have to do is subscribe and you'll get notified every time we drop a new video. So that'll do it for today. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.